not. Anyway, let me just explain to you what the concept is, because the concept is that you have a robber that dies and he has got heirs. He stole from a convert who has no halachic heirs, and therefore he gives it to the men of the Mishmar as atonement while he is alive. But unfortunately, he already gave it to the men of the Mishmar, and then he died. And what did he give? He actually just gave what he stole. He gave the robbery money, or the items which he stole, to the men of the Mishmar. He hadn't gotten as far as giving the Asham yet for the false oath atonement before he died. And now his children want the money back from the men of the Mishmar. And we don't give it back to them. So a buyer draws an inference from this and says, look, at the end of the day, the men of the Mishmar should give it back to the heirs if it doesn't do its job. So what was the money there to do? To make restitution. So the reality is, my question is that surely the restitution would best served if the convert had heirs, and then obviously it would be given to them. But since the convert has got no heirs, there's no way to make halachic restitution. So the only thing of it is that the men of the Mishmar can, by using it for their purposes and giving it almost as an avoider to Hashem, a service, in whichever way they see fit, at least, if it can't provide restitution, to give it back to the victim. Atonement can beget an aspect where the robber does nor his family receive any benefit from the stolen proceeds. So in other words, why do people steal? In order to get benefit from that which they stole. If they don't get the benefit, then there's certainly not any ulterior motive. The secondary aspect is you've deprived the victim and his heirs of the money, but it's too late. The victim's died. He doesn't have any heirs to be able to get benefit. So Abaya said the very fact that the men of the Mishmar accept the robbed money is proof that it provides half of the atonement for the robber's sin. Now, what half? Well, it provides atonement for the theft aspect. What it does not provide atonement for is the false oath, because he died before he was able to make his Asham offering. Okay, so that is one particular aspect, because that's the entire reason he gave the money. So we learned something very interesting, and that is that as far as robbery is concerned, it does provide an atonement. But it doesn't seem to provide an atonement as far as an Asham is concerned, nor a Chatas offering. Because what could happen is it could have been that the robber died and have made both the Asham offering after paying the principal, but before he died. So in that case, doesn't Asham count? So we have to look at it. If the Asham was offering and the person was alive, or Chatas, well, then there's nothing to talk about, they're alive. But there is a process between giving it and handing it in, compared with the time period at which it's actually sacrificed on the altar. So let's just look at our timeline here. He gave to the men of the Mishmar that which he robbed. And he then, a week later, gave the Asham, which is a ram for atonement, but they hadn't yet sacrificed the lamb yet. Sorry, not the lamb, the ram. And what happened was the robber died. So in other words, they had possession of that and they died. And as far as let's just say a case where it happened with one Mishmar, and he brought not only the ram of atonement, but he brought back that which he stole. So in that particular case, he gets half the atonement. But even if he'd have died, but before they sacrificed the ram for atonement, he doesn't get atonement for the ram, because he has to be alive in order to do that. And the same is if a Israelite brings money or an animal for a chatas offering, for a sin offering. Now, we want to ask the question, and the question on Abai is very straightforward. Abai is saying, look, the whole reason why the men of the Mishmar can keep it is because it has to have provided some form of atonement, at least for the robbery aspect. Otherwise, they've got no business keeping it. They have to refund the money to the heirs of the robber. But then the question is, well, why don't, if the Asham, we know that the Asham, if a person dies before the Asham was sacrificed for his false oath, or some form of guilt offering, and the Chatas is a different form of guilt offering, if that does not provide atonement, if the giver has died between the giving of it and the actual sacrificing of that particular animal, and there's no atonement, why isn't that animal given back to the heirs? Because we learn in the case of both the Asham and Chatas, Arthur doesn't provide atonement. It's not like making the restitution on the principle. Okay, so we're going to answer that question, but I want you to understand the problem. So, Arthur, can you give me over the problem?
Well, the problem is the robber who robbed the convert, okay, can't make restitution because he passed away. He has no heirs, okay. And the problem is, if if he's paid the money and there's actually no benefit for him, okay, the Kohanim needs to give it back because that was the purpose of giving the money to them.
Exactly. So we therefore learn from Abai that the inference is that it does provide partial atonement, certainly for the robbery aspect. He doesn't get atonement for the false oath, because either he died before he gave the Asham and it wasn't given to the men of the Mishmar at all, or alternatively, even if he gave it to the men of the Mishmar, they hadn't sacrificed the animal yet, and we learn this an exception. As far as a chatas offering, which is chatas means sin, we used to call the Dutchmen chatas, meaning sinners, because they were promulgators of apartheid within law. So we said if you subjugate a person, you're known as a chatas, a sinner. So that's how that term came about, by the way. So a sin offering or a guilt offering, if the person dies, it doesn't provide atonement. So therefore, what is the Gemara's problem with the buyer's inference, Arthur, based on what I've said? I've told you guys what it is. Kevin, before I'm going to get Arthur off the hook a sec, you have a go with it.
It's the buyer's inference about what?
Not the buyer, a buyer.
A buyer,
as opposed
okay.
to rover. Nobody's buying anything, but they're
stealing,
the buyer
not buying.
compared to the robber. Robber.
Yeah.
It sounds, they all sound like a buyer and robber. All right, sorry. They do sound
A buyer's inference to what?
What's the Gemara's problem with the buyer's inference? As Arthur answered it correctly. Arthur said, what did Arthur say? And then what's the problem in the Gemara?
You said the person that stole from the robber can't do a full atonement because the convert died, and you can't do a full atonement if the guy's not alive. That's the
No, that was part one of the problem 2 duffs ago. What's the current there's a separate problem now. What's the second problem now?
I don't know.
Okay, and then what's the problem with the buyer's solution to the problem? Arthur, what's the problem with a buyer's solution to the problem?
The problem now at the moment is the fact that the money was given for a reason, okay, and how can I put it into words? They've got money that technically hasn't actually done the full thing for atonement.
No, that's not the problem.
Okay.
Kevin, what's the problem?
I'll try my best. So I think the problem is that he gave the offering, and the robber died before it was sacrificed. That's the problem.
That might be the problem, but a buyer offered a solution. But what's the problem with a buyer's solution?
Okay, that's the problem I had with that. Okay.
And the ankle bone's connected to the hip bone. Okay, so we'll go through this step by step, guys.
No, I didn't hear you say a buyer's problem. Just say it again then. Sorry, I did.
Right, Kev,
I lost track. I'm trying my best.
You went for a run this afternoon.
No, I haven't run a personal trip. I haven't done any exercise
Man,
today.
you're not well. Okay. No, because you look tired, and I know I've got a talent for putting people to sleep. I should have been an anesthetist.
No, I'm wide awake today. Just sometimes you don't focus. I
Okay.
don't always.
So let's build problem and solution and problem. Problem number one: the robber has no way of making a proper restitution because his victim has died. Solution: the Gemara says that why can you not make solution? Okay, so the first problem is that the victim died. Generally, what's the first solution is to give it to the heirs of the victim. That's the most obvious solution. Now, that does provide in a certain way a restitution or an atonement, but it's not full because the victim himself has died. I think when one gets to Shemaim, one still might have to explain that. Do you get what I'm saying? So it's problem number one. The victim has died. You can never go back in time and fix it with that person. The best next solution is to give it to his children, because most people want to make sure that if they're not sorted out, their children can benefit. Okay, that's that solution. Now, if that Jew doesn't have any family, that's generally not possible, because even if he's not married and he doesn't have children, then either those children might not halachically be Jewish. If he marries a non-Jew, then they can't claim. Or alternatively, if it's a Jew and he doesn't have children, he might have parents, he's got cousins. We say he's connected through Yaakov Avinu, through other Jews. He's got some former relative alive. He never hatched out of an egg. But a convert, if a guy's newly converted, he hasn't had a chance to get married or have children. So he's got no cousins, parents, siblings, children, etc., etc. So he dies alone, no legacy. Therefore, we have a problem, because then the robber has no person to make restitution to. There's no inheritors or heirs. So what's the solution the Gemara offers? Is give it to the men of the Mishmar, where robbery is shared with the Mishmar for that week, because robbery is serious, compared to the false oath, which goes to the base up for that day. The Mishmar's duty for that day, not for the whole week's Mishmar. So there were two parts of restitution. The one is to pay back that which was robbed. The second one was to pay back an atonement for the false oath to Hashem. And the secondary aspect is the 1/5 surplus for wasting the victim's time. That would need to be paid to the victim or his heirs, or the men of the Mishmar in this particular case. So the men of the Mishmar provides what you call a certain atonement, although the victim never has restitution or his heirs. So that was the solution. Now, we've got a big problem now, because the robber wanted atonement, and therefore he gave the money which he stole to the men of the Mishmar, and he died. Now the children are saying that they want the money back, and the men of the Mishmar do not give back the money. So a buyer says that the reason they do not give back the money is because the robber gave it in order to get atonement, and therefore giving it to the men of the Mishmar has given him atonement, but not if he takes back that which he robbed. So it fulfills its purpose in at least partial atonement for the crime, two crimes, false oath and robbery. So for the robbery, he has atoned, although he hasn't made restitution to the victim. So the Gemara is saying, okay, that sounds like a reasonable reason why there's no refund to the heirs. But then the Gemara gives a big problem against a buyer, and it says, a buyer, tell me something. You know, with this, there was a false oath, because while the convert was alive, he took the robber to court, and the robber denied it. So what's due to you, victim that's passed away, is the one for surcharge, as well as the ram of atonement for the ashram for the false oath. So he's saying, okay. So then what happens if there was one mishmar and the robber, while he was alive, felt terrible guilt and brought back that which he stole and the ram of atonement and the one for surcharge? And it gave it all to the mishmar and he died. But the ram of atonement has not been sacrificed. The problem is that if he's not alive, the robber, when it was being sacrificed for his false oath, he doesn't get atonement for that false oath. It's only for returning that which was stolen that he gets atonement, but not if he's alive for either an asham, which is a guilt offering in this case, for a false oath, or any chatas, sin offering. So the problem the Gemara's got with Abaya is that, well, you mean to tell me, how come there's forgiveness for robbery, but there isn't a forgiveness for the asham or the chatas? If that was given while the person that sinned was alive, they gave it to the men of the Mishmar, but it hadn't been sacrificed yet. Answer me that. And then you could say, okay, maybe there is forgiveness. So then why can't we give it back to the family? So you're saying there's no forgiveness. So then fine, there's no forgiveness, we get that. But why is it not given back to the family? Because the reason why the person author took it to the men of the Mishmar is to get either the chatas offering to for a sin offering, or an asham offering for a guilt offering, in order to atone. Since that atonement wasn't achieved with an asham or a sin offering, why isn't not refunded to the family, since it doesn't process atonement if the giver of that is no longer alive? We understand, according for the robbery amount, that is not given back because it provides atonement. But if you're saying the asham is not providing atonement, nor is a chatas offering, then why don't we give it back to the family, that money? Either it's going to provide atonement with the buyer's reasoning, or if it's not, then give it back to the family because it's not fulfilling its purpose. Why do we not? Do you understand the question?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Kev?
Just repeat it, please.
Okay, Arthur?
Can I just say it again? I didn't. My headphone cut out for a few seconds there.
Okay, no problem. So the question on a buyer is saying exactly as Arthur quite rightly said back to me, that the reason the family doesn't get the money back is it actually did provide atonement, even though he died. He returned what he robbed. It provided atonement for the robbery. So the Gemara says, great. So how do you answer that as far as the asham offering is concerned, which is a guilt offering, or the chatas, which is a sin offering? If the person gave it to the men of the Mishmar and he died before that ram of atonement was sacrificed, or the cow or kabbonis or whatever it's needed to do, he doesn't get the atonement. So we're saying, okay. So firstly, there's a problem because he gets atonement if he returns that which he's robbed. But if he doesn't get atonement for the guilt or the sin offering, then okay, so he doesn't get atonement. So then why don't we just give the money back to the family then for the guilt offering or the sin offering? Why doesn't the family, if a buyer's reason is that he doesn't get the money back for the robbed item, the family, is because it has provided atonement, then if you're telling me with regards to a chatas, a sin offering, or an asham, a guilt offering, atonement isn't there unless the person giving it is alive, then give the money back to the family. Why are you getting to keep it? Kevin, can you give it back to me?
No.
Arthur?
Wouldn't it be that the first part of it is you paying back the money. Okay. So what's in the chitan of the other one's a penalty if you're not doing something. So that doesn't belong to the family. That belongs to the kohanim. I'm trying to figure out how, if you know what I mean, because
Okay,
I mean,
so
even though you didn't pay, I mean, it's
so
kind of
firstly,
like,
it's an excellent question. So firstly, Arthur, 10 out of 10 for a good question. It's not the right answer, but at least you're thinking laterally. What Arthur's saying is that there's a difference between paying a principal and a penalty, which is great thinking.
yeah.
So I'm very proud of you, Arthur, for thinking laterally. The thing that I'm very sad about was such a brilliant brain of lateral thought, which I never even thought of that. You would know the answer if you did any sort of preparation ever in all the time we've done the shiurim. So,
So Damon, sorry, can I say something?
no, just hang on a sec, Kev, just hang on a sec.
I thought of something. Okay.
So all I'm saying is, Arthur, with such a beautiful brain, you would know the answer if you did a bit of prep. And the reason why you guys are battling with the concept is because I'm meant to be your revision. You need to know the concepts and I need to clarify. If you're hearing the concept for the first time with me, you're doing something wrong. Now, no, Kevin is in his merit. Kevin is many duffs ahead and he does work hard at it. What's nice is if instead of being many duffs ahead, is we just speak to you guys and you listen to Rabbi Ron Cohen, where Arthur can do a bit of prep or Gavin can do a bit of prep and Kevin can do a bit of prep, and I solidify all the concepts you're not sure of, where you're not hearing it for the first time. And I'm not asking you to do that from now on because I know you guys are busy. But if you have a few doves left, it's not a bad idea. Okay, Kev?
Yeah, so what I wanted to say was, as Arthur said, the main issue is, no, just forgive me if I'm off track here. The main issue is, as long as the principal is paid, if the penalty is not paid, then that can be forsaken and by the court. The main thing is the principal. So is that
okay?
am I on the
Let me
right?
answer your question. It's a very good question. So I'm going to Arthur's question to be able to discern between the principal and the penalty is a very good point. It happens not to be correct, but the fact that you're thinking laterally is very impressive. But very. Now Kevin is saying it's not really matters as long as you pay the principal. So let me go back to a case where the victim was alive. Okay, let's not even take the convert. We said something else. We said if you first bring, let's just say even with a convert, let's just take this very case. If you pay the principal back to the men of the Mishmar first, and then you bring the Asham offering, atonement is reached. But if you bring the penalty first, but you don't pay back the principal, atonement is not reached. So this is in a way what Arthur and Kevin are hinting to. Okay, so let me just clarify one thing here. We are saying that the reason atonement is reached is not because the Asham is not important. You can't, there are two separate sins. The one is for robbery, and the one is having the chutzpah to swear on Hashem's name using a Torah scroll and using Hashem's name in vain to make sure that you don't pay money which you stole. So what we are saying is atonement is only reached if the principal is paid first. Why? Because you can say you're sorry all you like to a person, but if you don't pay them back, it's just words. That's number one. Number two, the reason why you used Hashem's name falsely was greed. So if you haven't even paid back that which you stole, you haven't remedied the bad character trait of greed, which caused you to swear falsely in the first place, nor rob. So robbery is at the heart of it. What made you swear falsely? Because you were caught and you robbed. If you never robbed anything, you wouldn't have swore falsely. So we have to have atonement in the order at which the sin was created. First, there was a robbery. Then you were caught out where the convert turned around and took that robber to court and said, "You stole," and he said, "I didn't. There were no witnesses. It was his word against the other." And that was the sequence of events. So if you want to have the atonement for the false oath before you pay back the principal, it's empty, because a ram of atonement might be a relatively cheap thing to replace, but you might have stolen R1,000,000 worth of stuff. So in that particular case, can only be sorry if the false oath is if you paid back the money, because you made the false oath because you didn't want to pay back the money. So the only thing we ever said, Kevin, is that if the 1/5 surcharge has not been paid, you can still offer the asham as long as the principal's been paid. But atonement will only be effected once you pay the 1/5 surcharge. So he's saying if you put in the asham before the principal, you have to bring the asham again, it doesn't count. If you put the principal before the asham, you still have to bring your asham if you want atonement for the false oath, but atonement would not be reached until that 1/5 surcharge is paid to the men of the Mishmah also. But your order of sequencing is correct. In other words, if you bring the 1/5 surcharge after the asham, because it's only 1/5 of the principal and it's not a substantial amount and it's negligible, it won't hold back atonement. But what would hold back atonement is principal not paid in the asham, as far as the order is concerned. But atonement is not completed nor achieved until the 1/5 surcharge is paid. But what holds back atonement is if you're doing the asham first or the false oath in the principal. It's not the right order at which the sin was committed. You haven't made any character improvement, so therefore it wouldn't ever affect. So what we are saying is your asham can be accepted by the men of the Mishmar once the principal has been paid, not the other way around, but you will only get atonement in Shemayim once you pay the 1/5 surcharge, which proves that all three have to be paid, but in the right order. That's all it proves. Except the 1/5 surcharge doesn't have to be in the right order. That's the only thing. Okay? That's what we've proved. So, there's, for whatever reason, any sort of sin offering or guilt offering, whether it's a chatas or an asham, doesn't affect atonement, even if the perpetrator gave it while he was alive, as long as the men of the Mishmar never sacrificed it while he was alive. It does not provide atonement. So if he happened to die, the perpetrator in the interim, he does not get atonement for the asham or chatas. But as far as the robbed item is concerned, if he returns that to the men of the Mishmar, he gets atonement. And the reason being is he's not caught between the process of receiving it and sacrificing it. They're not going to sacrifice the principal, because what happens if he takes 250,000 rands worth of cash? What are they going to do? Put the money on the altar? I don't know if they share the money or what, but the money's been paid back. It's effective, it's atonement. But if there's a gap in space between an actual offering, between when the person gave it to the men of the Mishmar and he died but before that was sent, there's no atonement because there was a delay in process. So what we are saying, it has nothing to do with the fact of one's a principle and one's a penalty. For whatever reason, any guilt or sin offering, if the person's not alive, it doesn't have atonement. So we're saying whatever the reason is, in many deep levels, doesn't matter. What should happen in that case is, since it never provided the atonement the perpetrator was hoping to get because he died before that happened, then in that particular case, that offering should be given back to the family. And therefore it proves that since it's not given back to the family, the Gemara is saying that maybe a biased theory of it providing atonement is not correct. Because if it does provide atonement, it's fulfilled its role. That's why he gave it to the men of the Mishmar. So if it doesn't, then give it back to the family. Don't keep it. So if you're saying it's kept because it's providing atonement, but we know with an asham and a chatas offering, it doesn't provide an atonement if the perpetrator dies. It means that either bias theory is incorrect or it should be given back to the family. That's the problem. And I'm going to give you the solution now. I hope you understand the problem. The solution is as follows, is that although it doesn't provide atonement you cannot. It's there's a certain holiness. We learn with both principles. Moshe Rabbeinu taught at Har Sinai. There's a special halachic oral tradition concerning a chatas, a sin offering. The animal has to be killed. I think it has to be decapitated, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, why? Why is it not given back to the family? Because it was given for a holy purpose. So, okay, atonement wasn't achieved, but you can't unconsecrate something. The Gemara uses the term unconsecrate. I think the word is deconsecrate, actually. By the way, I don't think the Schottenstein is the right definition. But if it's consecrated, you can't just deconsecrate it. It has to go through a process. So what happens is the animal is shechted. And although it doesn't provide atonement, there's something to be said about that intent. So we don't know in Shemaim what it does. They say it doesn't provide atonement, but it cannot go back to mundane activities. So that's why, because the atonement is not accepted after, that's why it's not offered on the altar. So the animal is shechted, where the men of the Mishmah can still eat it and use its hides. So it's still providing some benefit, but it's not enough of a high level of atonement to where the animal is sacrificed. Now, as far as the asham is concerned, is that the asham is left to develop a blemish, because you have to sacrifice it until an animal develops a blemish. So they let it graze in the field off until naturally, as an animal gets older, it will develop a blemish. And then what they do is they sell the animal and they give it for an olah offering for the community. So that doesn't provide an atonement for a guilt offering. There's a certain elevated status by a communal offering. Okay, and the same thing where the animal for a chatas is shechted, and the men of the Mishmah get to enjoy the meat and the hearts. So that doesn't provide an atonement. It must provide some sort of elevation that this person did have the right sort of intent, and therefore it's known as holy. And it can't just go back to the family. When an holy intention is done, it's got sanctity. So it has to have some sort of end that stays in sanctity, and that's the answer. Now I'm done. Kevin's going to teach us, and then we can go.
Yeah, very brief. Okay, so continuing in the Parshat Ki Tetzei, and yesterday Gavin brought up something about if a woman is sexually violated. So I found 3 things related to that in Raw. So the first thing says here, if a virgin woman is violated, she is not. It's not her fault, and the perpetrator. The perpetrator actually has to marry her if she's a virgin, if she's not engaged. If it's a woman that's actually betrothed to someone, the guy is put to death, the rapist is put to death. This is what happened in biblical times, so there's quite a distinctions. And so just to repeat that, if a virgin woman and is raped, the rapist has to marry her, and this obviously doesn't follow modern thinking and the modern way of operating. But if a rapist rapes a betrothed woman, betrothed I think either means engaged or married, then he is put to death. So you might say it's a bit unfair. Why should the woman, the virgin who is violated, why should she have to marry the hog? That seems a bit. I don't know. I didn't see any commentary there. Maybe he has to pay a knas, or I'm sure if she doesn't want to, she doesn't have to. But maybe she has to. That's the question.
Okay.
And
firstly, yeah, Gav, continue.
So no, I was wondering. No, I've got a question. I can't remember. If a woman's married, right? So not the example where she's a virgin. when she's married, can she go back
Yeah.
to her husband? Because that's one of the issues. I think if you're a Cohen, you definitely
Uh,
can she go back to her husband after she's raped?
doesn't
Do you know?
say anything.
Because I think
I
that's one
wonder
of the
because
issues.
it's
I'm not
not
sure.
adultery. It's not. It wasn't. There wasn't consent.
It's a
So
problem.
I
It's a
wonder. That's a
problem
good
for
question.
it's a problem for a Cohen. I know it's a problem for a Cohen. Cohen, if your wife's
Yeah.
raped,
I'm looking. I'm
you
looking
actually
at
can't
this
go
in
back to
any
her. So
commentary
I'm not
here.
sure
No,
if
I
it's a
don't see
problem for
any.
anybody else.
Yeah. Maybe if it's a
Okay.
Kohen, there's an exception.
Yeah, I think it's maybe just a Cohen thing. I'll double check with Edwin.